Welcome to TheKillFile, your favorite true crime podcast. I'm your host, Brittany Spears. Each week, we will explore the dark corners of true crime, unsolved mysteries, and murder. Join me as we uncover secrets, investigate evidence, and dive into the chilling details of some of the most fascinating cases. Get ready for a journey into the dark unknown because, in TheKillFile, nothing stays buried forever. Hello there, and welcome to episode 56 of TheKillFile. I am so glad that you guys are back for another case this week. A few quick reminders before we jump into today's case. This fall, I will be rolling out some bonus content where you guys can pay a few bucks a month and get some bonus episodes from me. I've been working on these this summer, and I'm so excited to start sharing them. I think that you guys are going to love them. They will be a little different than our normal episodes and touch on different subjects like natural disasters, plane crashes, and one that I'm trying to get up and running eventually will be something called Listener Files. So if you or anyone that you know has a good true crime story, encourage them to allow you or tell them to send in their story and email it to thekillfilepodcast@gmail.com. I'm looking for anything like a murder from your hometown that maybe your town went crazy over when you were younger. Maybe it's not a well-known case. Maybe your dad was a cop and he has some crazy stories that he shared with you. Maybe your aunt was an accountant for the mafia. Maybe your schoolmate from high school ended up killing someone. Anything around true crime that you think is interesting and want to share. You can stay anonymous, it can be short and sweet, and I will compile stories, hopefully, for the bonus content. Also, don't forget to check out the website at thekillfile.com where you can submit a case for me to check out, or you can check out the merch shop where we have anything from tank tops to candles. Also, there are some car magnets if you want to support TheKillFile. Slap one of those on your bumpers and let others know that you're a listener. Thank you to everyone who has shared the podcast with a friend or taken time to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen, because that is truly the best way to boost the podcasts for others to find and listen as well. If you haven't, please take a second to rate and review. I would be so very thankful. Finally, just follow us on social media. If you haven't yet, we're all over, and you can find the links on the website. Okay, that's it for business. Let's talk about today's case. Today, we're going to talk about a priest named Father Hans Schmidt. Trigger warnings for today are going to be rape, necrophilia, feticide, molestation, murder, and possible murder of a minor. Here we go. Call no one on earth Father. Ephesians 3:15. Sorry if I butchered that. I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. We know that today's story is going to revolve around a man known as a father in the specifically Catholic religion, so I thought that we would start today with a little knowledge of exactly what is a father in the religious sense, and what are their powers and duties. Let it be known first and foremost that I was raised Catholic to a point, and then we stopped going to church altogether, and now in my adult life I'm an atheist, but very much believe to each their own, so as I don't know shit about my own religion growing up, I'm researching and doing my best here, so please don't come for me. Okay, so what exactly is a father? In Catholicism, a father is a term that's used for a Catholic priest. The job of a priest in many religions are the same, although there are usually a specific set of rules or whatever for each one. The job of a priest is said to be someone who, according to the Archdiocese of SantaFe.org, is to quote-unquote proclaim or announce publicly the Word of God, aka give sermons or homilies. A sermon is based on, like, the real world, and I read that a homily is based on Scripture or the Bible. Other things that a priest or father is responsible for are funerals, marriages, baptisms, reconciliations, and sacraments, including the Eucharist and sacraments of the sick. Most of these are easy to understand, but what is a sacrament and what the hell is a Eucharist? According to the dictionary, which is kind of the simplest definition, really, that I could find, and also, I believe that we kind of covered this when we did the Sister Miriam case. We may have went over this, but for anyone who missed that episode or whatever, we'll briefly go over these again, just so we can kind of get a sense of how important this person is to the people of particular faiths. So a sacrament is like a Christian or religious rite, like a baptism, confirmation, or the Eucharist, that is done by someone who has been, like, quote-unquote ordained by Jesus Christ. So in the belief, not just anyone can perform the special tasks or rituals that a priest or father can, because they're supposed to be closer to God, and God is supposed to, like, speak and work through them, if I understand it correctly. The sacrament is basically the action or the expression that we are able to see, and it's the representation of God's grace, according to the USCCB, or United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. So the Eucharist, for anyone who doesn't know, is when a Catholic church, and I have no idea if any other religions do this, but they do something during each Mass called communion, which is when the priests or the fathers give you the Eucharist, which is the body and blood of Christ, aka a dry-ass wafer cracker and a sip of wine, even as children. I would imagine that this has changed, but I can attest to the fact that the wine was yuck. The sacrament of the sick is something that fathers perform in an anointing of the sick, which is when people who are suffering are united through the Father, when according to the Roman Catholic Diocese of Peterborough, sorry if I butchered that, they're basically given Jesus' saving and healing power. This is usually with like an oil that has been blessed by a bishop during Holy Week, which I don't know what that is. Fathers also spend a lot of their time visiting people in different establishments like hospitals, nursing homes, and also families in their community of the church, to name a few. So a religious priest or father usually takes something called a vow of poverty and vows of celibacy and obedience. These religious figures usually live with other priests or what are called like brothers of his own community. Catholic priests are called fathers apparently because the church people are their spiritual children, and they have total and exclusive love for their church and people, which is why they are the people's spiritual fathers. Okay, I think we get the picture of what a father is and does. So one thing that I'm going to say before we get into the story is that back in the day, especially a priest or father was someone that you didn't really question, someone that you were supposed to trust immediately, and someone who was supposed to have your best interest at heart. I think as things come out about different religious communities, we're kind of more aware of the fact that priests and fathers are just human beings, and some of them are giant pieces of shit. And some religious establishments are rife with abuse. Now, on to Father Hans Schmidt, which I will refer to as Father Schmidt from here on out. Hans Schmidt was born in Aschaffenburg, which is a town in Germany, in the year of 1881, way back. Both of his parents were said to be involved in different religious groups, which I found interesting. His mother was a Catholic, and his father was apparently a Protestant. Don't ask me the difference, because I have no fucking idea. Father Schmidt's childhood was not great. His father was extremely strict and also beat him and his mother regularly. At a young age, there would be already signs that today we would see as disturbing and need of some help. But there were said to be mental health issues on both sides of Father Schmidt's family. As a child, Father Schmidt would develop a fascination with death, dissections, mutilations, and dismemberment of animals. He was also said to have kind of crossed his deep religious fanatics with the drinking of blood, which I mentioned earlier was something from the Catholic Church, but it was wine. Still, it was supposed to be the blood of Christ, which is kind of weird, in my own opinion. There was a story told that at one point Father Schmidt in his youth had cut the heads off of 2 of the family's geese, and he kept the severed heads on his persons, actually in his pocket. But why though? Father Schmidt was also a frequent visitor of the local village slaughterhouse. Usually it was said that he went daily. There, he would be able to see farm animals being killed and dissected, and this was extremely fascinating to him. Father Schmidt finished school and then went to study theology, which is the study of religious belief, and like the nature of God and scripture, I guess, for anyone who doesn't know. It was at this time that Father Schmidt had told those around him that he was interested in becoming a Catholic priest. I will say in his defense that I don't think it's that weird that somebody is interested in like dissection if it's more of like the scientific basis. Like, you got to remember that there are people who perform autopsies. Shout out to the autopsy techs or all of the people that work at a morgue. That can't be easy, and yet they have to look and see it day in and day out. Obviously, they wouldn't do it if they weren't fascinated in it. So that in itself, I don't think that that's weird. But when you couple it with the rest of the stuff, like the drinking the blood and just kind of almost torturing animals or whatever, I think that's where it becomes a problem. While Father Schmidt was studying in the seminary, it would be found out that he was actually doing illegal activities, like forging diplomas for his fellow students that were failing. He would subsequently be arrested and then charged with the forgery. The prosecutor for the charges of forgery in the city of Mainz wanted to throw the book at Father Schmidt because he was getting pressure from the educational system at the time, who took this crime very seriously. In fact, the prosecutor wanted a prison sentence to be handed down for this misconduct. Father Schmidt's father, which is weird, However, knew how bad this was going to be and was able to get and hire a really good lawyer. This lawyer sought to prove the serious and long history of mental illness on both sides of the family and was trying to prove that Father Schmidt was not to be held accountable for those mischievous actions because of that. He would tell the court that there was a good chance that Father Schmidt would be predisposed to having some sort of mental illness, and one source would say that the defense used the fact that his parents practiced different religions as a reason that his household was unstable and that all of this contributed to his actions. We have to try to remember to see this story through the year in which he was arrested, which is actually now 1905. This shit would never fly now. Well, at least one could hope not, but using these as excuses and reasons for forgery seems silly to me, and coupled with all of the rest of the points to some seriously fucked up things that are coming our way through this father, but again, maybe not back then. There seemed to be a lot of doubt surrounding Father Schmidt's mental wellness and ability when it came to being a Catholic priest, but nonetheless, he would claim to have been ordained by someone named Bishop Kirsten, and this was in the city of Mainz on December 23, 1904. To be ordained, according to the CatholicNH.org, quote, "When a man is ordained, it means that he is configured uniquely to Jesus Christ through the grace, the Holy Spirit. Through this configuration, this change in the very essence of his personhood, the priest is enabled to act as a representative of Christ to the people of God, as the Catechism says." End quote. The Catechism is like the official principles or doctrines of the religion. So in summary, when a priest or father is ordained, it's official that they are a man of the cloth, a man of God, and are supposed to help and serve people through God, essentially. Father Schmidt would say that he had been ordained in a private ordainment, but then he would go on to tell people that, quote-unquote, his real ordination came the night before in the form of a vision. He would tell people that a woman named St. Elizabeth, who I guess was kind of known for her charity and for her endless compassion for people, a noble woman from the 13th century, had touched Father Schmidt on the shoulder and said she ordained him herself. He would later admit that there was a light with her, but he didn't want to tell anyone in fear of being made fun of from his peers, as apparently they often did. That kind of blew my mind, because I thought that God or whoever allegedly came to people in different ways and spoke to people, and to know that others would make fun of you for that is kind of weird to me. Father Schmidt would have different parish assignments, including villages in Seligenstadt and Bergel, where problems and accusations would quickly arise. He was accused of molesting the young altar boys, while there would be some who say he also had affairs with numerous women. Not only had he been accused of molestation and affairs, but he was also alleged to have visited sex workers while he was in the villages. Look, I have no opinion on people having relations with sex workers. It's a job, and I think that women should be able to do what they want for work. And if people are willing to pay them for their services, then who gives a shit what they do or with whom? I don't look upon women who either choose or are left with sex work as their job. I loved the movie Pretty Woman. I also don't have a problem with affairs. I mean, it's shitty for people, I get it, but also none of my fucking business. And who am I to get on a moral high horse about the decisions that people make? I do, however, draw the fucking line at the molestation of altar boys. What in the actual fuck? In every source I was using for this case, they just glazed right over it, like it was just a part of the story, and it didn't seem any more important than other accusations, and I personally disagree. Huge fucking difference between visiting sex workers and taking advantage of underage boys. Also, while we're on the subject, if priests or fathers take all these vows to be this or that, then the hypocrisy of his actions alone should shame him out of his fucking duties, right? It drives me crazy. And then to still give sermons like your whole life isn't a fucking lie and your beliefs aren't bullshit, even to yourself. So Father Schmidt was known to give what was described as eccentric sermons and saying mass in quote-unquote creative ways, and I got the feeling that kind of rubbed people the wrong way. These made people in the parish extremely uncomfortable, and there were plenty of complaints that would eventually go all the way up to the bishop. It got to the point where no one in Germany would accept him in their churches. And what happens when a father has a horrific reputation of sexual abuse, adultery, and hypocrisy? Well, they get shipped off to America. That's what. They couldn't just fire this piece of shit? Tell him that his actions have shamed himself and the church? Nope. It's swept under the rug, and they get to move to the land of sinners. Father Schmidt would be taken at a Roman Catholic church in Louisville, Kentucky called St. John's, which, weirdly enough, is the name of the church that I went to when I was younger. However, even with this clean slate that Father Schmidt was given, it still didn't go as planned. Here, his congregation would notice his interpretations of the scripture as feeling off, and again, his eccentric sermons were seemingly distasteful, and again, he would have problems. This time, it was with his senior pastor, though. I would love to know what eccentric sermons in the Catholic Church were like. A religion that is very old-fashioned, very strict rules and thinking, what does eccentric look like to them in the early 1900s? Church officials decided to send Father Schmidt to yet another church, and this time it would be St. Boniface Church located in New York City. It was here in 1912 that Father Schmidt would meet a young woman named Anna Mueller, who was at the time the housekeeper for the rectory, in other words, where the priests lived. Anna was from the Austro-Hungarian Empire and had immigrated to the U.S. in 1910. I had to look up what the Austro-Hungarian Empire was because I'm a moron, and I learned that it was the merge between the Austrian Empire and the Kingdom of Hungary. I don't know if it's Hungary or Hungary. I'm sorry if I'm saying it wrong. This would dissolve after World War I. Anna and Father Schmidt would become friendly, sharing their personal thoughts and interests. It became apparent that Father Schmidt was attracted to Anna, even though he was a father and was supposed to remain celibate. I think it's safe to say that that train already left the station. Father Schmidt would claim that God had given him orders to quote-unquote love Anna, though at first she rejected his advances. Over time, however, she would give in and the pair would start a sexual relationship. God, the fucking hypocrisy. However, this was not the only sexual relationship the father was engaging in. Turns out he was also having sexual relations with a local dentist, a man named Ernst Moray. Father Schmidt was eventually again transferred to another church, this time a St. Joseph's, and this was located in Harlem, yet he did his best to maintain both of his relationships. In fact, he would tell Anna that he was going to leave the priesthood to be with her. Sources would also say that he performed a quote-unquote secret marriage, where he would allegedly marry himself and Anna, putting their names on an actual marriage certificate. I'm not sure if this was considered binding or not. I don't know the rules of if you're a father. There's certain religions that you're not allowed to be married. So was it real? One source said that they had actually filed the marriage certificate. So I'm not sure, but something's not right. One source called it staged. So maybe it was just to appease Anna, but I have no idea. On one particular evening, while Anna and Father Schmidt were having sex, sources said that this was on the high altar of the St. Joseph's Church. The father would reveal something quite disturbing to Anna, scaring her to her very core. Father Schmidt would tell Anna that he believed that he had received yet another command from God, but this time it was to sacrifice dear Anna. This terrified Anna, and of course, she in turn called him crazy. It was later said that she had told a friend how disturbing Father Schmidt's claim was. Not long after this incident, Anna would figure out that she was in fact pregnant. This only made tensions worse between the couple. On the evening of September 2nd, 1913, Father Schmidt would give Mass, as well as do his duties of prayers and blessings for the members of the church. Later in the evening, it was said that Father Schmidt and Anna had gone to an apartment that they had together apparently rented while posing as a married young couple. It was here that Father Schmidt would slash Anna's throat with what was said to be a 15-inch butcher's knife while she was asleep. The father then raped his pregnant mistress and drank her blood as she was bleeding out and dying. Then Father Schmidt would dismember her body by, according to an article on ATI, sawing off her head with what was said to be a hacksaw, and then proceeded to saw her body into 7 pieces. After this, he would wrap the different parts of his lover in newspapers that I guess were dated August 31st. When it came to her lower section, he would put that in a pillowcase, which had been monogrammed with the letter A on it. And finally, he would, quote, attach a large piece of gray-green schist to each of the body parts, end quote. For anybody that doesn't know what schist is, it's just a big-ass rock, I think, or a type of rock. Father Schmidt then took his dismembered victim and dumped her various parts into the Hudson River whilst he was on a ferry, and had figured that the rocks would be heavy enough to sink her body and keep it down. I also read that he actually had to make multiple trips to dispose of her body. One source would say only 3 days after this, there were 2 children who were playing, and this was near Clayton's bathhouse located on the banks of the Hudson, and disturbingly, they would find a dismembered torso of Anna that was in a pillowcase. Just a few miles down the river in Weehawken, New Jersey, more of Anna washed ashore. The evidence of the murder that were found in New Jersey were given to the police in New York because apparently the schist that Father Schmidt had used to weigh down the dismembered body were extremely rare in New Jersey, pointing to the fact that the body must have come from New York. The remains would be sent to a mortuary in Hoboken, where doctors would try and identify who this dismembered body belonged to. They would make note that this woman was well kept and came from a background of comfort due to her skin and manicured nails. The police had also found the New York newspaper that was with the body, and they were also able to see some thread and wire wrapped around the body, and they knew that this was the kind that milliners used. I had to look up what milliners were, and apparently that's the name for people who make women's hats. Doctors figured out that this Jane Doe was about 21 years old, and the physicians all agreed that the, quote, dismemberment was expertly done, end quote. I personally, right there, think that that's very telling. One thing that would help the authorities was the fact that the price tag was found to still be attached to the pillowcase that had contained Anna's torso. This would help trace the origin of the pillowcase back to a factory in Newark, and the factory exclusively sold goods at a George Sachs furniture dealer located in Manhattan, which must have been a huge break in the case for the authorities. This is when the case would be given to the New York State Police Department, and they would assign their chief inspector, a man named Joseph Farou. When the investigators would inquire about the pillowcases at George Sachs, they were unable to remember just how many pillowcases had been sold. However, when the receipts were checked, it was found that on August 26th, a buyer by the name of A. Van Dyke had purchased a mattress, bed spring, pillows, and some pillowcases, and had them delivered to an apartment on the 3rd floor at 68 Bradhurst Avenue. When Inspector Farou went to question the superintendent, he would find out that the apartment belonged to a married couple. It was said that the husband's name was H. Schmidt, and he spoke with a thick German accent. They were unable to gain a description of the wife of this man, so authorities set up a stakeout for 3 days to watch the apartment. When no one came or went from this apartment, Inspector Farou told a detective Frank Casassa to enter the apartment with force and search for any evidence. The men would find that the apartment had been recently cleaned, but they would find some stains of dried blood, and this was on the walls. They also found, upon searching, a large knife, according to a newspaper article in the New York Times that was dated on September 15, 1930. And of course, I'll link the entire article in the show notes, along with all of my other sources, per usual. So according to this article, the authorities would find a butcher's knife that they said was 15 inches long with blood on it. And there was a handsaw as well, which is just so sloppy. Why wouldn't you clean the walls and the knife? Dumbass. In Father Schmidt's apartment, the investigators would find something that piqued their interest, and this was a set of business cards with the inscription on them, quote, Dr. Emile Moyer, formerly assistant surgeon of the Municipal Women's Hospital, Paris, France, representative of the Chemical Hygienic Manufacturing Company. They would also find numerous bottles of medications. The investigators also turned up men's clothing that had the name A. Van Dyke stitched into the lining of the garments. The authorities also found letters in English and in German, and all of them were addressed to a Hans Schmidt. When they inspected the letters closely, many of them had come from a woman with the name of Anna A. Mueller, and these contained her address as 428 East 17th Street. Authorities went to that address, but they were met with the information that Anna no longer lived there and had left when she had gotten the housekeeper position at St. Boniface's Church. When the authorities went to St. Boniface, and a Father Braun told them that the housekeeper had actually been transferred to St. Joseph's, they then asked if the name Hans Schmidt sounded familiar to him, and this is when he told police that he too had been moved to St. Joseph's Church. It was 1:30 a.m., but Inspector Farou was determined to go straight to St. Joseph's Church anyways. One thing that apparently had bothered Inspector Farou was that no one had mentioned that they had seen a man in priest vestments or clothing. They weren't even sure if this Schmidt man was who they were looking for. I kind of thought that was odd too. Nobody that saw anybody coming from any of those apartments or whatever had seen a father. While knocking on the church's door, a Father Daniel Quinn would answer, and after finding out what the police were doing at the door at this hour, he took them to Father Schmidt's room. Father Schmidt seemed to be confused upon awakening, but once he realized what was going on and why the police were there, he immediately said in a calming and chilling way, quote, "I killed her. I killed her because I loved her," end quote. Father Schmidt then gave the detectives all of the details of how he killed his lover and how he then dismembered her. He went through how Anna never knew what was coming or what was even happening because he did not wake her up, as he only turned on the bathroom light as to not wake her. He went over how he drug her lifeless body to the bathtub to dismember her. He also told the story of getting rid of the evidence, including at this point, burning the blood-soaked mattress in an empty lot, setting it on fire where numerous kids and then other onlookers would gather to see the mattress ablaze. This was not only horrifying to the authorities, but it was also extremely shocking. Remember, back then, a man of the cloth or a member of the clergy, they didn't do this kind of thing. Well, at least that's what everybody believed. This was a time where people automatically trusted a father or priest, usually without question. At some point during questioning, whether it was this night or later on, the subject of the business cards with the Dr. Emile Moyer came up, and this is when Father Schmidt would inform the authorities that he sometimes had told others that he was a doctor under various different names. He would also speak to the medication bottles found at his apartment and inform Inspector Farou that Father Schmidt had been interested in the company that made this medicine and that it was illegal to use, although we don't know what the medicine was exactly. It seemed as though certificates of stock were found in a certain manufacturing company's name inside the apartment as well. When Father Schmidt was arrested, the case would gain almost instant international attention. This is when more allegations against Father Schmidt would start coming out. There seemed to be a lot of thought and suspicion pointing to the fact that Anna may not have been Father Schmidt's first murder victim, and I totally agree. Father Schmidt had been seen around town with a woman named Helen Green, who suddenly vanished, and police couldn't find any traces of this woman. Father Schmidt claimed that Helen had gone to Chicago. There was another woman that Father Schmidt had been seen around the time that he had moved to America from Germany, and he would tell people that this woman was his wife. However, this woman also disappeared. I'm not sure of what her name is, but these are just the women that people noticed. I wonder how many people he could have killed that others didn't notice, especially the sex workers that he was known to frequent. Father Schmidt was also suspected in the deaths of 2 children as well. The person who owned the apartment complexes where the father had an apartment said that she had seen him bring a 5-year-old boy to where he lived. I guess Father Schmidt claimed that this boy people saw was his son. When the woman once was able to, she asked him what his name was, and the boy replied, August Van Dyke. Oh, God, it gave me chills when I read this because I kept wondering why he was putting things in the name of A. Van Dyke. Holy shit, right? Then one day the boy was never seen again. The other child that Father Schmidt was suspected of having killed was a young 9-year-old girl named Alma Kellner. Sadly, Alma's body would be found having been burned in the basement of St. John's Church in Louisville, Kentucky, where, if you remember, Father Schmidt had worked. Sadly, Alma's body had been burned, but the police still believed that her murderer had tried to dismember her first before she was burned. Which, that's exactly what I was thinking. Why was Anna's body so precisely cut up? And who goes from just killing somebody to dismembering them that quickly? There's pieces missing. In the case of Alma, it would be the church's janitor, a man named Joseph Wendling, that was suspected and then later on would be convicted of the murder. This man was then sentenced to life in prison for her murder. The entire case was said to be based on circumstantial evidence. However, one thing that the authorities did have was that bloody clothing was found at the janitor's home. Again, this was a time where that blood couldn't be tested to see if it was Alma's or if maybe he himself had had an accident, but who knows? I would need to find out more about that case to form my own opinion, but it is interesting. Later on, it was said that Alma's uncle would request that Mr. Wendling would be pardoned, which happened, and then he was sent back to his native place, which was France, and this was in 1935. After the news of Anna came out, Father Schmidt wouldn't talk about any of these cases when questioned, though. Trial started on Monday, December 8th in 1913 in New York City. The presiding judge was Judge Foster. The defense would use the insanity defense. He was mentally unstable. They said that he couldn't understand his own actions. Witnesses would attest to his violent and erratic behavior. that they themselves had witnessed. Some people even testified that they believed that Father Schmidt may have had dissociative identity disorder, or what they used to call split personality disorder. Others would testify that they believed that Father Schmidt was losing his grip on reality, and this is when Father Schmidt would lean into this, telling the court that he had heard a voice that was telling him to kill Anna, and then he told them about the divine message of her quote-unquote sacrifice. A psychologist named Dr. Smith, Eli Jelliffe, would then testify saying that Hans Schmidt had over 60 relatives who also had a history of mental illness and felt that Father Schmidt had indeed inherited his insanity from his family and should not be given the death penalty because of this. However, the prosecution would disagree, and they showed evidence that was very compelling, showing that Father Schmidt had premeditated Anna's murder. They said that he was very careful about how he went about the murder, and the fact that he dismembered the body and tried to cover up the murder and get rid of all the evidence means that this was calculated and not the actions of someone who was insane and impulsive. The prosecution then drew the court's attention to some of the letters where the father admitted he knew the relationship was not right, and I guess in one of the letters he even said that he had some plans to solve their problems. The prosecution would agree that Father Schmidt was mentally disturbed, but they did not feel that he was indeed insane, which I personally agree with. He definitely has something going on, or maybe he's just sadistic, I don't know, but I don't think he was insane either. On December 30th, 1913, the jury would say that they could not reach a unanimous decision, and the judge was forced to declare a hung jury. This means that there would be a second trial for Father Schmidt. The interest in this case was bordering obsessive for some, as it was just everywhere, and people couldn't get enough. The new trial would begin Monday, January 19th in 1914, and a new judge, Justice Davis, would preside. During the second trial, the prosecution was able to bring a young woman by the name of Bertha Zeck, who was previously a maid for Dr. Ernst Murray, which, if you remember, was his male lover, and said that Father Schmidt had asked if she would be willing to pose as Anna so that he could take out a life insurance policy on her for $5,000. And of course, he would be the sole beneficiary. The defense, of course, used the insanity defense again. A detective by the name of George Thompson would testify that Father Schmidt had plans to create poisons for people who wanted to commit suicide, and this was especially for those who were terminally ill. Father Schmidt was going to give these people fake death certificates so that the people who used the poison could be buried and there would not be any scandal. Detective Thompson would say that Father Schmidt had thought that this was going to bring him a ton of money. Dr. Ernst Murray would also testify about him and Father Schmidt's time together at the 68 Bradhurst's apartment, and that he and Father Schmidt had told the landlord that they were both medical students and that they were in need of this apartment so that they could conduct their medical experiments. However, officers would also be able to disprove this by saying what they found in the apartment upon their search was an illegal operation for counterfeiting money. They had proof of this because not only had the kitchen actually been turned into a dark room for these illegal activities, but they also found various materials used for a counterfeit operation and camera printing with numerous photographic supplies. On February 5th, 1914, the jury would deliberate just 3 hours, and this time it would not come back hung. This time, the jury would find Father Schmidt guilty of first-degree murder, and then he was handed a death sentence. One source would say that Father Schmidt heard the verdict and that he would say he was very satisfied with the outcome, and he wanted to die today rather than tomorrow, as if anyone gave two shits what he wanted. He was then transferred to Sing Sing, where he would wait for his execution day. Unfortunately for Father Schmidt, his defense attorney filed an appeal pretty quick after the trial, and this, of course, delayed his execution even further. In December of the same year, so 1914, Father Schmidt would come out with a wild accusation saying that not only did he lie about being insane during his own trial, but now he was claiming that it was in fact his male lover, Dr. Murray, who had accidentally killed Anna while trying to perform an abortion that went wrong. No one was convinced by this in the least, and Dr. Murray and his maid Bertha both said these claims were completely untrue. Also, his appeals were denied in the courts as well, and on February 18th, 1916, Father Schmidt, still at Sing Sing prison, was taken back to the electric chair, which apparently was called Old Sparky. I will post it on the TheKillFile socials this week. It's, I think, kind of famous. As he was being strapped down for his execution, Father Schmidt would say that he begged for forgiveness from anyone that he had hurt or scandalized, and then turned around and said he forgave anyone who would did the same to him. Like anyone fucking cares about your forgiveness. Father Hans Schmidt then said his last words were going to be saying goodbye to his quote-unquote dear old mother. After Father Schmidt was executed, he would be buried in New York in an unknown grave. There's a lot of suspicion that Father Schmidt was in fact responsible for the disappearance of Helen Green, which happened not long before Anna was murdered. Most believe that this was not his only murder, and I would agree, especially because of the dismemberment. This is just my opinion, but like I said before, we usually see in true crime there's like an escalation, not just someone who murders someone else and then immediately dismembers them, although that does happen. But from a father or a priest, I just have to wonder how many were before Anna. I'm going to leave you with a quote that Father Schmidt said about the woman he loved, Anna, quote, "I loved her. Sacrifice should be consummated in blood," end quote. And that, my friends, is the story of Father Hans Schmidt, murderer, pedophile, priest, and sadist. I feel like there is just so much to the story that we don't know, and I'm willing to bet there are many, many more victims out there of Father Schmidt that we just don't know of and could possibly never know, and that bugs the shit out of me. I wish there was ways to go back and figure these things out from like the old-timey cases because, there were serial killers running all over the place that were never caught and never even noticed, probably. I've said this before, but the people who are in positions of power or are supposed to be better than the rest of us really are the scariest types of killers or pedophiles or whatever because it's just not supposed to be that way. I mean, we know a lot more now than we used to with just blindly trusting these types of people back in the day, but it's sad to say that this type of shit is still happening today. I wonder what their God would think about these awful things that these quote-unquote men of God were doing to women and children. What the fuck is wrong with people? Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this fucked up case as much as I did, and I hope to see you guys next week for another case here on The Kill File where nothing stays buried forever. Stay safe, you guys. Bye. Alright guys, that's going to do it for today. A few quick reminders before you go. Please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on your platform. It will help The Kill File and other true crime lovers find us. Also, check out the website at TheKillFile.com to suggest a case. Find our merch shop for fun Kill File gear, which you can also find at thekillfile.printify.me and help support the podcast. Have a suggestion or want to share your own true crime stories? Email thekillfilepodcast@gmail.com for a chance to get them read on the podcast. Follow The Kill File on your favorite social media platforms. We are on Facebook, Instagram, X, Blue X, TikTok, and of course, you can subscribe on YouTube as well. Find all of the links for the socials on the website. We are either listed as The Kill File or The Kill File Podcast. Come on back Mondays wherever you get your podcast fix when we will cover another case here on The Kill File, where nothing stays buried forever. Stay safe, you guys. Bye.